The State Department's recently released annual terrorism report found that Pakistan's authoritarian courts, these are the anti-terrorism courts that have been set up in Pakistan that are supposed to work under the rule of law, but the acquittal rate is something like 75%. I mean, there's a real question. They're really plagued by a situation where they're almost incapable of prosecuting suspected suspects or terrorists to date. And given that, do we have any hope that the Mumbai attackers will face justice?
Thank you. I want to point to a comment that you made in your opening statement that I completely agree with, that the LET should be part of that secret report card that we have developed with Pakistan in terms of benchmarks that they need to meet. Because as I said in my testimony, both written and oral, the LET does have links to Al-Qaeda. They are an international danger. We should in no way give Pakistan the impression that we will give them a pass on the LET so long as they take steps on terrorists like al-Zawahiri and other Al-Qaeda leaders. I think we need to put a full court press on both issues because they are related and they both affect our security as well as India's. In terms of the question, will they actually move forward with prosecutions? They have detained LET leaders, but they have failed. It's been almost 3 years now, and they have not moved forward with prosecuting these individuals. I think it's completely unacceptable. And where you talk about the challenges in the court system and their inability to prosecute individuals, I believe that it's really a lack of political will at the top, and that if a message is sent from the top levels of the Pakistani leadership, and here I'm talking about the Pakistan military and intelligence agencies, to move forward, I think Pakistan could. So I think we need to keep the pressure on, make it clear that if Pakistan doesn't move forward with these prosecutions, it's going to increasingly lead to Pakistan's international isolation and ultimately weaken its position in the region. And I think this is a message that we need to keep driving home to the Pakistanis. And it does need to be at the top of our priority list. And so that comes back to the point that you're absolutely right. It has to be part of that report card. Well,
maybe Mr. Sherman and myself, given our concurrence on the view on this, should write the administration on this subject, and I'd look forward to work with you on that, Brad. Let me ask you also about you mentioned the Karachi project, and one of the things I wanted to get to was the link between LET and the Indian Mujahideen and the Students Islamic Movement of India. The Karachi project, you indicate Pakistani intelligence and LET worked to motivate and equip Indians to attack their own country, right? Can you go into a little detail on that? Can you expand on it a little bit?
Yeah, first let me give a little bit of history. The Students Islamic Movement of India, SIMI, that you mentioned, have been around for a long time, since the early 90s, and they were sort of functioning within the country, but it wasn't until around the attacks of 9/11 that they were perceived as a real danger to India, and they were outlawed at that time, and they had made statements supporting Al-Qaeda. And there is a belief that the Indian Mujahideen, some of its leaders may have been some of the same individuals that were involved with SIMI. So the Indian Mujahideen may be an evolution of that SIMI group, which of course then it would be an indigenous group made up mostly of Indians. And the interesting thing is, there were many attacks in 2007, 2008, for which the Indian Mujahideen claimed responsibility in India. And the 2008 Mumbai attacks were different in that it was obviously the Lashkar-e-Taiba, the Pakistan-based group that was involved. But I think the Karachi project, or the information that's been forthcoming on the so-called Karachi project, begins to explain what maybe we have been seeing over India in the last 5-6 years. And if the information on the Karachi project is correct, what it discusses is a very deliberate effort by both Pakistani intelligence working in tandem with groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba and Harakat al-Jihadi Islami to, infiltrate into India, recruit Indians to carry out attacks, equip them with the capabilities to do so. So I think this is something that we need to continue to look at and explore, but it also shows that India has a two-pronged issue that it needs to address, and that is one, how does it deal with getting at the Pakistan-based organizations? I think the U.S. and India have to work in tandem on that issue. And second, what can it do to prevent the recruitment of Indians? And that's why I brought up the idea of working together on countering violent extremism, working with communities to educate about the radicalization process. And I think it's a good sign that the Home Minister has actually come forward and said, hey, this is a problem we have to deal with. Indian politicians have been reluctant to do so in the past.
We're running out of time, and so I'm going to ask one question here. Some have suggested that the U.S. and Indian high-tech companies could collaborate to spur the next generation of homeland security technology. How could they better join forces? I'll ask you that, and then Mr. Latif, I'll ask you, to what extent do U.S. restrictions on technology sharing hamper U.S.-India counterterrorism cooperation? But what are the dangers of easing such restrictions? If you could just briefly answer that, and then we'll go to Mr. Sherman.
Sure. I mean, put very briefly and simply, obviously India is home to a number of the more advanced technological companies, certainly from an IT perspective. And when you look at India's biggest deficits, to me it's the information sharing challenges they have between and among their various police entities, and how they connect with other police entities, and how they in turn connect with the Home Ministry. So I think there's a lot that they can do right there, and there's a lot I think that the United States can do, because we've had to have similar integration challenges. If you really look back to 9/11, the greatest progress has been made in the sharing of information vertically and horizontally. So I think from an architectural standpoint, we have a lot that we can share. I know the Indians have visited the fusion centers. I know they have examined CGIS and and NDEX, some of our other systems. So I think there are opportunities there.
Thank you, Mr. Salufo. Dr. Latif, just that last question.
Yes, sir. So on technology transfer with India and the United States, I mean, there's been a tremendous amount of technology that has been transferred to India since the civil nuclear deal was actually completed in 2008. So there's been a paradigm shift, I think, within the U.S. government on transferring technology to India. And we've seen that most recently with the very high percentage of licenses that have been granted.
True enough. We were discussing the downside of risk on some of that.
Right. Well, some of the risks would entail perhaps the potential that India might re-engineer or reverse engineer some of the technologies. And also, given their long relationship with Russia, there is a concern within the government that perhaps maybe some sensitive technologies could leak to Russia and be compromised.